The spotlight cut through the darkness of the Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on March 7th, 1981. 8,000 people packed every corner of that venue, shoulder to shoulder, all waiting for the man in black. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap beer, and the stage crew was making final adjustments to the microphone stands. Nobody in that arena knew they were about to witness something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Johnny Cash walked onto that stage at 8:37 p.m., wearing his signature black suit and carrying his Martin guitar like it was part of his own body. The crowd erupted. People were screaming his name, holding up signs, crying before he'd even sung a single note. He'd been touring hard that year, playing nearly 200 shows, and the exhaustion showed in the lines around his eyes. But when he stepped up to that microphone, something in him always came alive. He opened with Folsom Prison Blues, his voice raw and powerful, filling every corner of that theater. The band behind him was tight, professional, hitting every beat with precision. June Carter Cash stood in the wings, watching her husband do what he did best, connecting with working people who saw themselves in his music. 3 songs in, Johnny launched into I Walk the Line, and that's when he first noticed something in the front row. A man sat motionless in a wheelchair, positioned right at the edge of the stage. He couldn't have been more than 30 years old, but his body looked decades older. His skin had that translucent quality that comes when life is slipping away, and an oxygen tube ran under his nose, connected to a small tank mounted on the back of his chair. The man's eyes were locked on Johnny Cash with an intensity that cut through the darkness like a searchlight. Johnny had performed for hundreds of thousands of people over his career. He'd played for presidents and prisoners, for soldiers in Vietnam and inmates at San Quentin. He knew what desperation looked like. He knew what it meant when someone looked at you like you were their last hope, their final connection to something beautiful in a world that had turned cruel. And this man in the wheelchair was looking at him exactly that way. The man in black finished I Walk the Line, and the crowd roared their approval. But Johnny didn't transition into the next song on his set list. Instead, he walked to the edge of the stage, dropped to one knee, and looked directly at the man in the wheelchair. The entire theater went quiet. 8,000 people held their breath, confused, wondering what was happening. Johnny's voice came through the speakers, soft but clear. "What's your name, friend?" The man tried to speak, but no sound came out at first. His lips moved, and he had to try twice before his voice worked. When it finally did, it was barely a whisper. But the microphone picked it up. Thomas McKenzie. Thomas McKenzie, Johnny repeated. And somehow, the way he said it made the name sound important, like it mattered. "How old are you, Thomas?" 29. The answer came easier this time, though the effort of speaking was visible in how Thomas's chest heaved. Johnny nodded slowly. His jaw tightened, and people who knew him well could see the emotion rising in his face. "You come here alone tonight?" Thomas shook his head. A woman in her 50s sat beside him, her hand gripping the armrest of his wheelchair so hard her knuckles were white. "My mama," Thomas whispered. "Sarah McKenzie." Sarah McKenzie's face was streaked with tears, and when Johnny Cash looked at her, she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." The band members behind Johnny had stopped playing. They stood frozen, instruments in hand, watching their frontman kneel on that stage like he was at an altar. June Carter Cash had her hand over her mouth in the wings, tears already flowing. Nobody in the audience moved. Some people were crying, though they didn't even know why yet. Johnny turned back to Thomas. "What brings you here tonight, Thomas? And don't tell me it's just the music." Thomas McKenzie took a shaking breath. The oxygen tank hissed softly in the silence. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than before, like he was drawing on some reserve of strength he'd been saving for this exact moment. "I'm dying, Mr. Cash. Got maybe 3 weeks left, the doctors say. Cancer. Started in my lungs, spread everywhere. They told me 6 months ago there wasn't nothing more they could do." Thomas paused, gathering himself. I worked in the Briggs and Stratton engine factory for 11 years. My whole life, really. Started when I was 18. The dust, the chemicals, they said that's probably what did it. But I never complained, not once. It was honest work. Put food on the table. Johnny stayed on his knee, never breaking eye contact. That's good work, Thomas. Honest work. Nah, my mama, Thomas continued, glancing at Sarah beside him. She saved up everything she had to get these tickets. Sold her wedding ring, her china set, everything of value she owned. She knew I'd been listening to your records since I was a boy. When I was working third shift at the factory, coming home at dawn with my hands torn up and my back aching, I'd put on your albums. Folsom Prison. At San Quentin. Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. They got me through. The theater was absolutely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop in the back row. 8,000 people barely breathing. I told Mama not to spend that money, Thomas said, and now his voice was breaking. Told her I'd be fine, that we should save it for after, but she said no. She said I'd given 11 years to a factory that poisoned me, worked myself sick for pennies while the owners got rich, and if I wanted to see Johnny Cash one last time before I left this world, then by God, that's what was going to happen. Sarah McKenzie was sobbing openly now, and several people around her in the front row were crying too. The emotion was spreading through the audience like ripples in water. Johnny Cash stood up slowly. He unstrapped his guitar and handed it to a stagehand without looking. Then he did something no one expected. He jumped down off that stage, landing solidly on the floor of the theater right in front of Thomas McKenzie's wheelchair. The security guards rushed forward, but Johnny waved them off with one hand. He knelt down again, this time at eye level with Thomas, close enough that no microphone was needed. But the theater was so quiet that every word carried. Thomas, Johnny said, and his voice was thick with emotion. I spent years of my life angry at the world, angry at myself. I was addicted to pills, booze, anything that would make the pain stop. I hurt people who loved me. I destroyed nearly everything good I had. And you know what saved me? Thomas shook his head slightly. It was people like you, Johnny continued, working men and women who came to my shows, who bought my records, who wrote me letters telling me my music meant something to them. When I was at my lowest, when I thought maybe the world would be better off without Johnny Cash, I'd get a letter from a factory worker or a truck driver or a coal miner, and they'd tell me my songs got them through their shift. That made me want to live. That made me want to be better. The entire audience was crying now. Tough men in flannel shirts had tears streaming down their faces. Women clutched their husbands. Strangers held hands. So, when you tell me you worked 11 years in a factory that poisoned you, Johnny said, his voice rising with controlled anger, when you tell me your mama had to sell her wedding ring so you could see one concert before you die, that makes me furious. It makes me sick. Because this country chews up good men like you and spits them out, and it ain't right. It ain't right at all. Thomas nodded, tears flowing freely now. Johnny reached out and took both of Thomas's hands in his own. What's your favorite song of mine? Thomas didn't hesitate. I walked the line, always has been. When my daddy left us when I was 8 years old, Mama played that song and told me that's what real men do. They walk the line. They keep their promises. They stay true. Johnny Cash squeezed Thomas's hands. Then he stood up and addressed the entire theater, his voice booming through the speakers as the sound crew scrambled to adjust levels. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been performing for 25 years. I've played the Grand Ole Opry and Madison Square Garden. I've sung for presidents and prisoners. But tonight, right here in Milwaukee, I'm going to play a private concert for my friend Thomas McKenzie. And every single one of you gets to be a witness. The audience erupted in applause, but Johnny held up his hand for silence. Thomas can't stand, Johnny said. "He can't come up on this stage, so I'm going to sing down here, and I'm going to sing every song he wants to hear for as long as he can listen. The rest of the set list can wait. The schedule can wait. The venue owners can wait. This man gave 11 years of his life to a factory that killed him. He deserves more than 45 minutes of my time." What happened next would become legendary in the world of country music. Johnny Cash sat down cross-legged on the floor of the Riverside Theater, right in front of Thomas McKenzie's wheelchair. A stagehand rushed over with an acoustic guitar. The band came down off the stage and formed a semicircle around them. June Carter Cash sat down beside her husband, taking his hand. And then Johnny Cash began to sing. He started with "I Walk the Line," but this version was different. Stripped down, raw, intimate. His voice cracked in places, thick with emotion, but it made the song more powerful. Thomas McKenzie sang along, his voice barely audible but determined, every word meaning something. When that song ended, Johnny didn't stop. He played Ring of Fire. He played A Boy Named Sue. He played Man in Black. And when he got to the verses about wearing black for the poor and the beaten down, he looked directly at Thomas McKenzie and sang it like a promise, a vow. The audience sat in reverent silence. Some people took photos, but most just watched, understanding they were witnessing something sacred, something that transcended entertainment. After the sixth song, Thomas's breathing became labored. Sarah McKenzie leaned forward, whispering something to Johnny. He nodded and set down the guitar. "Thomas," Johnny said softly, "you need to rest." Thomas shook his head stubbornly. "One more, please. Sunday morning coming down." Johnny smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "You've got good taste, friend." He picked up the guitar again and began the opening chords. The song was about loneliness, about waking up empty and lost, about searching for meaning in a world that feels foreign. As Johnny sang, Thomas closed his eyes, and something remarkable happened. The oxygen seemed to flow easier. The tension in his face relaxed. For those 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Thomas McKenzie wasn't dying. He was just a man listening to his favorite singer, and nothing else mattered. When the song ended, Thomas opened his eyes. He looked at Johnny Cash, and when he spoke, his voice was clear, strong, like he'd found something he'd been searching for. "Mr. Cash, I want you to know something. I ain't afraid anymore. I was scared before tonight. Scared of the pain, scared of leaving Mama alone, scared of just disappearing like I never mattered. But you gave me something tonight. You showed 8,000 people that a factory worker from Milwaukee matters, that my life meant something, that I'm not just a number or a statistic. I'm Thomas McKenzie." And Johnny Cash sang to me. The words hit Johnny like a physical blow. He bowed his head, and when he looked up, tears were streaming down his face. "You always mattered, Thomas. Always." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something. Would you read it?" Johnny took the paper carefully, unfolded it and read it silently first. Then he looked at the audience, his voice barely holding together. "Thomas wants me to read this out loud. He says it's for everyone here tonight, and for anyone who ever feels like they don't matter." The theater was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. Johnny cleared his throat and began to read. "My name is Thomas Anthony McKenzie. I was born on August 4th, 1951 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I never got married, never had kids, never did anything the world would call important. I worked in a factory, came home tired, and did it again the next day. But I want you to know that I loved my life. I loved my mama. I loved the sunrise coming through my window. I loved the feeling of an honest day's work. I loved Johnny Cash's music because it told me I wasn't alone. If you're listening to this, if you're working hard and feeling invisible, know that you matter. Your life matters. The work you do matters. Don't let anyone tell you different. And if you can, hold on. Hold on to whatever beauty you can find. It's worth it." By the time Johnny finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in that theater. Sarah McKenzie had collapsed against her son's wheelchair, sobbing. Band members were openly weeping. People in the back rows were hugging strangers. Johnny carefully folded the paper and placed it in his own jacket pocket. "Thomas, I'm going to keep this, and I'm going to read it every time I feel like giving up. Every time I forget why I do what I do. You've given me a gift tonight, and I want to give you one back." He stood up and addressed the audience one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something I've never done before. Tonight's concert is over, but not because of lack of respect for you. Because the most important performance of my life just happened right here on this floor. Thomas McKenzie is going home with his mama, and I'm going to make sure they never have to worry about money again. I'm setting up a fund to cover Thomas's care, his mother's living expenses, and when the time comes, a funeral that honors a working man who gave everything he had." The audience rose as one, applauding so loudly it shook the walls. But Johnny wasn't finished. "And I'm going to do more," he said, his voice rising with passion. "I'm going to start a foundation for factory workers who get sick from their jobs, for people who give their bodies and their health to keep this country running and get nothing in return. Thomas McKenzie matters, and so does every other working person in this country." The applause became thunderous. People were chanting Thomas's name. He sat in his wheelchair, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face, his mother clutching his hand. Johnny Cash bent down one final time and embraced Thomas McKenzie. They held each other for a long moment, two men from different worlds connected by music and humanity and the raw honesty of that moment. When they finally separated, Thomas said something that only Johnny heard. But later, backstage, Johnny told June what those final words were. He said, "Thank you for making me real. Thank you for making me seen." That's what he said. And I told him he'd always been real. He'd always been seen. The world just needed to pay attention. Thomas McKenzie died 16 days later, on March 23, 1981, with his mother by his side. True to his word, Johnny Cash established the Working Man's Health Foundation, which has helped thousands of factory workers and their families get medical care. The organization still exists today, operating out of Nashville, funded by Johnny's estate and donations from people who heard this story. The paper Thomas gave to Johnny that night, it's framed and hanging in the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. Every day, thousands of people walk past it and read those words. Many of them cry. Many of them take photos. Many of them leave that museum with a renewed sense that their own lives matter. The people who were in the Riverside Theater that night never forgot what they witnessed. Years later, a journalist named Robert Sullivan tracked down 47 audience members and interviewed them. Every single one said the same thing. It changed them, made them kinder, made them more aware of the invisible people around them, made them understand that everyone has a story and every story matters. Johnny Cash performed for another 2 decades after that night, but he always said the Milwaukee concert was the most important one of his career. Not the biggest, not the most famous, but the most important. Because on March 7th, 1981, the man in black got down off his stage and sang for a dying factory worker named Thomas McKenzie, and in doing so, he showed 8,000 people what it really means to walk the line, to keep your promises, to stay true. Thomas was right. He did matter. His life meant something, and his final words to that audience, read by Johnny Cash with tears streaming down his face, continue to echo today. You matter. Your life matters. The work you do matters. Hold on to whatever beauty you can find. It's worth it. If this story moved you, if Thomas McKenzie's words meant something to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave a comment telling us about a time someone made you feel seen, made you feel like you mattered. Because we all need that reminder sometimes. What would you have done if you were Johnny Cash that night? Would you have stopped the show? Would you have gotten down off that stage? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Thomas McKenzie, wherever you are now, for reminding us all what really matters.